The wind howled through Iron Valley, biting and cold, carrying the sting of snow that glittered like powdered glass. Behind Caleb Dern's trading post, a dozen women stood in a muddy yard, their skirts stiff with frost. The air reeked of horse sweat, smoke, and desperation. Among them was Clara Wynn, her face hidden beneath a rough burlap veil tied at the chin. Her fingers were red and raw, clasped together as if prayer alone might change her fate. She hadn't chosen to be here. Her uncle had sold her name to a registry of mail-order brides, just to be rid of the burden she'd become. "Keep still, girl," one of the men barked. "You'll fetch a buyer sooner that way." Clara flinched but didn't move. Her breath came shallow beneath the veil, the fabric stiff with frost. Somewhere inside the trading post, men's voices murmured and boots scraped across wooden planks. Bargains were being made, for rifles, salt, and women. The door creaked open, spilling out a gust of warmth and smoke. A man stepped into the yard. He was tall, wrapped in a fur-lined coat, his hat brim heavy with snow. His beard was streaked with ice, and his gray eyes were the kind that looked straight through silence itself. Jonas Hale had ridden down from the mountain that morning for salt, lamp oil, and feed for his horse, nothing more. But the moment his gaze landed on the line of women, his boots stopped in the slush. Inside the post, Caleb Dern leaned against the counter, smirking. "Another batch from back east," he drawled. "Dreamers, the lot of 'em. Thought they'd find gold and love. All they'll find here is a roof and a hard winter." Jonas said nothing. His eyes moved slowly across the line until they rested on the figure in the veil. The woman didn't shift or lower her head. She simply stood, still as stone, snowflakes gathering on her shoulders. Caleb noticed his stare. "You don't want that one," he said, with a sneer. "Ugly under that cloth, I promise. Family sent her off, 'cause she eats more than she's worth. But she can work, strong back, quiet tongue. Might suit a man who don't care what's under the sack." The words cut like a knife, but Clara kept her head bowed. Jonas's voice was quiet. "And if no one takes her?" Caleb shrugged. "Back east, or to the kitchens. Either way, she's someone else's problem." For a moment, the wind filled the silence. Then Jonas said, simply, "How much?" Caleb blinked. "You serious?" Jonas dropped a small leather pouch on the counter. Silver coins spilled across the wood. "That'll do," he said. The trader's smirk faltered. "Well then. Guess the lady's got herself a husband." Before Clara could understand, rough hands pulled her forward. "Take your man, sweetheart," Caleb said with a laugh. "You just got bought." Her knees trembled. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Jonas stepped forward, close enough that she felt the warmth of him through the cold. His voice was calm, steady. "Can you ride?" She nodded once beneath the sack. "Then we leave." "Storm's coming." They rode in silence as dusk fell over the valley. Snow came harder, thick and unrelenting, swallowing sound and sky alike. The horse's breath steamed in the freezing air. Clara's fingers ached from gripping the reins, but she dared not complain. Jonas rode ahead, a shadow against the endless white. She didn't know where he was taking her, or what kind of man would buy a stranger sight unseen. Hours later, they crossed a frozen river, its surface glinting blue under a pale moon. A small cabin appeared at the edge of the woods, smoke curling from its crooked chimney. Jonas dismounted and tied the horses to a post, then turned toward her. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. Clara hesitated. Then she took it. His grip was rough, but steady, like a man who built his world from the ground up. Inside, the cabin was simple, a stove, a wooden table, a narrow bed in the corner, and a cradle she hadn't expected. The air smelled faintly of pine and bread. "You have a child?" she asked softly, her voice muffled under the veil. Jonas hung up his coat. "A boy." He's staying with Mrs. Carlin down in the hollow till the snow clears. He's been sick. Something gentle flickered in his tone, something that caught her off guard. Jonas turned to face her. "You can take that thing off now," he said. Clara's hands froze on the knot behind her neck. You don't want to wait till morning?" He shook his head. "You're here now. Best I know who I'm talking to." For a moment she stood still, her heart pounding loud enough to drown the wind outside. Then she untied the rope. The burlap slipped away, falling to the floor like a curtain between two worlds. Jonas looked at her, not with shock or pity, but with quiet curiosity. Her face was pale from the cold, freckles scattered across her cheeks, eyes gray-blue like river ice. She braced herself for laughter, disgust, rejection. Instead, Jonas only said, "You can cook." She blinked. "Yes. I can." He nodded. "Then start there. I'll tend the fire." That was all. No judgment, no mockery. For the first time in years, someone saw her not as a burden, but as a person who could make warmth in a cold place. The snow came heavy that night, drumming on the roof like distant drums. Jonas fed the fire until the stove glowed orange. Clara worked quietly at the table, peeling potatoes with a knife he handed her. Neither spoke much. The only sounds were the pop of the fire and the soft scrape of steel against skin. When the stew began to simmer, the smell filled the small room, onion, salt, and comfort. Jonas came to stand beside her, watching the pot. "Smells like something a man could live for," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "Or something to keep him alive." He grunted, a sound that might have been a laugh. When they sat down to eat, he bowed his head for a brief moment before lifting his spoon. Clara followed suit, whispering a prayer she hadn't dared say aloud since her mother died. They ate in silence, but it was a good silence, the kind that felt like safety. Later, Jonas spread his blanket on the far side of the room. "You'll sleep near the fire," he said. "If you hear anything, wolves, wind, anything, wake me." She nodded, clutching the quilt he'd given her. But through the long, cold night, she didn't hear wolves. She heard the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing across the cabin, and somehow, she felt less alone than she had in years. When dawn came, the world outside was buried in white. Jonas shouldered the door open, the light spilling across the floor like silver. Clara gasped softly. "It's beautiful." He nodded. "You don't fight the mountain," he said. "You live with it." She watched him step into the light, a man shaped by the wilderness, and for the first time, she wondered if the life she feared might become the life she'd been meant to find. And somewhere deep within her, a tiny spark began to thaw. Not love. Not yet. But the beginning of something that might survive the winter. The storm passed after 3 long days. When the first sunlight touched the pines, the world outside the cabin glittered like a kingdom made of glass. Snow hung heavy from the branches, and the frozen river whispered faintly beneath its icy shell. Jonas returned from the barn that morning with a small smile beneath his frost-lined beard. "Weather's easing," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "I can fetch my boy today." Clara looked up from the stove, where a loaf of bread rose golden in the pan. She wanted to ask what the child was like, but the words tangled on her tongue. So she only nodded. Before noon, Jonas saddled his horse and rode off toward the valley trail. The hours stretched slow and silent. Clara tidied the cabin, her hands moving just to fill the emptiness. When hoofbeats finally broke the quiet, she rushed to the door. Jonas stepped inside, snow on his shoulders, and a small boy clinging to him. "This here's Eli," he said softly. The boy peeked out from behind his father's coat. His cheeks were pale, his dark hair tousled, his eyes wide with both fear and wonder. Clara knelt slowly, her voice gentle. "Hello, Eli. I'm Clara." He didn't speak at first. But after a long pause, he reached out and touched her hand, small fingers, warm and trembling. Something inside her chest ached in a way that wasn't pain. That night, the cabin felt different. Eli slept in the cradle again, the fire glowed brighter, and Jonas's eyes seemed softer each time he looked her way. When Clara sang a quiet tune to lull the boy to sleep, Jonas paused in his work by the door. "You sing," he murmured. "Just old songs," she said shyly. "They sound like home," he replied. For a while, that was all. But a kind of peace settled between them, the kind that grows in places untouched by the world. Days turned into weeks. The snows began to melt. Clara found herself smiling more often, humming while she baked or mended clothes. Eli followed her everywhere, his small hands eager to help. Together, they made bread, swept the porch, and learned the rhythms of the mountain. Jonas watched them, quiet but thoughtful. Sometimes he'd linger in the doorway, arms folded, as Clara showed Eli how to knead dough or gather kindling. Once, when she caught him staring, she asked, "What?" He shook his head. "Been a long time since I've heard laughter in this house." Clara's smile was soft. "Maybe your home was just waiting for someone to remember how." Jonas said nothing, but something in his eyes flickered, the beginning of warmth. When the trails cleared, they rode into town for supplies. It was the first time Clara had faced the village since being bought. Whispers followed them from porch to porch. "There she is," someone muttered. "The veiled bride." "Poor thing," another voice sneered. "Mountain man's prize." Clara kept her head high, her hands steady on the horse's reins. She didn't hide this time. She walked beside Jonas, silent but proud. When they reached the wagon, Jonas stopped before climbing up. "You hold your head higher than most men I know," he said. She shrugged, though her eyes glimmered. "If I let them see me break, they win." Jonas smiled faintly. "Then let them lose." On the way back, they didn't speak, but the silence was easy, like two souls who no longer needed words to be understood. By late March, the snow gave way to color. Wild lupins spread across the slopes, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. Eli brought her flowers every morning, first clumsy handfuls, then single perfect blooms. One afternoon, he handed her a bright blue blossom and whispered, "Mama." The word struck her like a bell. She froze, staring at the boy. Jonas turned, startled, his eyes searching hers. Eli didn't even notice. He just grinned and said proudly, "Mama, I picked it myself." Clara's throat tightened. She knelt and gathered him close, tears blurring her sight. "You did," she whispered, holding him. "You did so good." When she glanced up, Jonas was watching, his face unreadable, his eyes full of something deep and wordless. That night, as Eli slept, the firelight danced between them. "Seems he's got two blessings to thank God for," Jonas said quietly. "His strength coming back, and you." Clara turned toward him, her voice a whisper. "Maybe we both found what we were missing." The peace didn't last forever. One morning, Jonas rode out to check his traps. When he didn't return by nightfall, Clara felt the old dread rise in her chest. By moonlight, she finally saw a shape moving through the trees, Jonas, slumped in the saddle, blood streaking his sleeve. "Jonas!" She ran to him, helping him down. He waved her off weakly. "Just a scrape." Inside, by the firelight, she cleaned the wound. The cut was deep and angry. "What happened?" she asked. "Old trap. Rusted steel bit my arm good," he muttered. "You could have lost it," she said sharply. He smiled faintly. "Guess it's good I've got you to save me from my own foolishness." Her hands paused. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling. Then she said softly, "Maybe you saved me first." Jonas looked up, really seeing her. Her hair glowed in the lamplight, her face calm but trembling. "I didn't save you, Clara," he said. "I just gave you a place to start again." Her voice broke. "That's more than anyone ever gave me." He reached out, his hand rough and warm, resting lightly on her wrist. "You weren't meant to live hidden," he said. "You were meant to be seen." Her eyes filled. "And you see me now?" He held her gaze, steady and sure. "From the first moment you took that veil off." The room went still. Between the light and the quiet, something shifted, gentle, undeniable. She smiled through her tears. "Then I'm glad you looked." Spring rolled into summer. The river thawed, birds returned, and laughter filled the cabin again. Clara often stood on the porch at dusk, watching Eli chase fireflies across the clearing. Jonas would come out beside her, the sky painted in gold and lavender. "He's happier," Jonas said one evening, nodding toward the boy. "So are you," she replied. He chuckled softly. "Haven't heard anyone say that in a long time. Maybe you needed someone to remind you." He studied her for a moment, then spoke as if weighing every word. "I thought the mountain would be my only companion until I died. Quiet. Predictable. Safe. But then you came, and now it feels like home." The wind brushed her hair across her face. She didn't move to hide it. "Jonas," she whispered, "I wasn't looking for much, just a place where I could belong." He took her hand, his fingers rough against her soft palm. "Then stay," he said simply. "Because you already do." Weeks later, when they rode to town again, the whispers were different. "There they are," someone murmured. "The Hales from the valley." "No veil this time," said another. "Looks happy, don't she?" Clara smiled as she walked beside Jonas and Eli, sunlight glinting off the snowmelt in the distance. Old Mrs. Tabor, who'd once laughed at Clara's arrival, stopped by the store porch, speechless. "You look well, Mrs. Hale," she said finally. Clara tilted her head, smiling kindly. "I am." When they rode home, the valley spread wide before them, green, gold, and alive. Eli sang a tune in the back of the wagon. Jonas reached over, brushing a stray curl from Clara's face. "You know," he said, half smiling, "the day I lifted that veil, I thought I was just buying a bit of peace." "And what did you find?" she asked softly. He looked out over the hills, the wind warm on his face. "A life." The wagon rolled on toward the horizon as the sun dipped low, painting Iron Valley in the glow of a new beginning. And somewhere between the mountains and the sky, the ghosts of their old lives melted away, leaving only what mattered: a man, a woman, a child, and a home built from hope. A story of redemption, courage, and love that learned to breathe again in the quiet heart of Iron Valley.